You're tuning into the Journey to Your Best Self podcast, where we explore the past holistic well-being, personal growth, and living a fulfilling life. Each episode, we bring you insightful conversations, practical tools, and inspiring stories to help you integrate your mind, body, and spirit on your journey to becoming your best self. Let's dive in and embark on this journey together. And welcome back to the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian O'Neill, joined by my sister, clinical hypnotherapist, yoga instructor, and certified life coach, Tara O'Neill. Today, we are excited to welcome Dr. Catherine Corona, a seasoned meditation teacher, spiritual guide, and founder of Soul and Spirit, a daily spiritual practice program that delivers ancient sacred practices in 5 to 7 minutes a day. With over 6 decades of spiritual practice, we're going to need documentation because she doesn't look nearly 6 decades seasoned. Dr. Corona has studied with some preeminent master teachers of our time and is here to share her wisdom on spiritual healing, the power of sacred practices, and how soul awareness can transcend the limitations of our physical existence. Dr. Corona is also an accomplished speaker, author, and musician in her own right, blending Eastern and Western wisdom traditions to help people find peace, healing, and spiritual fulfillment in today's world. We are thrilled to have her and get a ton of information for our guest viewing and listening, guidance, and a lot of stuff that you guys are going to be able to apply in your life. So stay tuned. You're going to get a lot of information, mind, body, and spirit out of this episode. Without any further ado, welcome aboard, Dr. Corona.
Hi, Brian and Tara. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It's an honor. I'm so excited. I feel the presence of spirit, so I'm even more, excited than normal. So thank you for bringing yourself and that beautiful presence with you.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah, my question starts with, we talk about the new program that you have going, right? And one might think that you would have had kind of it all figured out and you just have your old reliable newsletters or practices or things that you've been using year in and year out, but you're still really trying to communicate and innovate and try new things. Is that what drives you, still at this point, and to not be complacent and not just, rehash or reuse, not that the things that you were doing in the past, are outdated or not useful anymore, but what kind of drives you to keep innovating?
Well, on the spiritual path, I'm sure you found that it's always new and fresh and changing. And as we continue, as a person expands, especially if they're doing a spiritual practice of whatever type, that's built, that's the very nature of it is to expand our consciousness. So as we expand our consciousness, we're traveling new realms, new levels. We're experiencing new energy fields. So it's always new and fresh. And then that feeds back, at least in my experience, and I'm just talking from my experience. Everybody's so different, but it feeds back to a guidance or teaching, right? We all have our own inner teachers. And spirit is the teacher as we travel the path, and it feeds back. What's next? Let's go higher. Let's go deeper. How do we do that? How do I design my life to do that? Where do I go inwardly to do that? What do I bump up against my limiting beliefs? Do I bump up against doubt? Do I bump up against fear or concern? And if I do, then how do I use whatever I've mastered, whatever tools I've mastered to open those gates, pull them aside, and go even farther? So it's always innovating me. And then whatever I can share, if I'm called to share it, then I'm happy to share it. I mean, certainly I'm where I'm at from teachers, from people that have shared, or I've bumped into people every day. I think I bump into somebody. I learned something from somebody. And I'm always bumping into that. And then people share it. I share it. You guys share it. It's pretty exciting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we were just talking about, I think this is such an interesting experience that I'm seeing of younger people being so fresh and open and curious and looking for something beyond their day-to-day lives, beyond what the track might be for them, however their track has been laid out for them, whether it's a parent or society's track. And now I just see it over and over again, young people going, well, what else? What more can I do? What's in here? Really asking the questions about who they are, and not just who they are psychologically, because that's one journey in and of itself, but who they are as a soul and a spirit.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on that reception when you're called to share, have you seen that change, since you started out? Or, can you see trend lines as far as how things are people more open, less open? Does it go in waves? Does it depend on the zeitgeist and what's going on in the country? Can you speak to a little bit about how that's gone throughout your journey?
Well, since I've been around for many decades now, and I can look back on how society has changed, it's what we're talking about here today is in the mainstream. It's in the mainstream now. And more and more, I mean, look at yoga. 20 years ago, you didn't see it explode. It's exploding because people gained something very deep, not only physically, but in the practices where they come to at the end of practice, going into a stillness, chanting Om, or whatever tone they chant. This is mainstream now. So you just look, things that you hear in the news, the way people, I mean, I've just been really touched by how people are talking about love like they never have before. That used to be an uncomfortable, what does it mean? Is it romantic? It's uncomfortable. We don't, I grew up in a time in the 60s and 70s where, people weren't hugging each other. Now it's like, oh, I never met you, hug, Yeah, it's changed so much.
That's amazing. And it sounds like for the better.
Yeah.
I think that's all the better. All
So
the better.
okay, I have a question about how do we encourage, and forgive my mainstream jargon of like the indigo children, right? I think that there is this wave of new, souls coming in, and real like it's as simple as almost like the you do you culture. It's like that's not just a trend. Like these kids are so accepting of things that, like you said, maybe we wouldn't have been like 40 years ago. And so that isn't even necessarily in the spiritual sense, but a friend was just telling me about, I'm jumping all over the place because I'm so excited, but a friend was telling me about a credit card commercial and how they were using Mercury retrograde and crystals in this mainstream credit card commercial. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like, it's really, it's here, right? It's here.
Yeah.
So this new age, this new wave of new age is really here. And what's so beautiful about your work is you're bringing in like the lineage of these sacred practices that are thousands of years old, that are really rooted in the divine. So that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. And I definitely want to talk a bit more about that. So this new way, these new generations that often get scapegoat, like they're like the scapegoats, oh, this generation, they're this, that, and the other thing. How could we reframe that and really like actually support them and their soul, their lighter souls, their like ability to be accepting, that they have these open hearts, like want to have embrace their creativity and a soul and heart centered life? How can parents, maybe that older generation that are like, you got to get a job, you got to get a 9 to 5, or you got to have the 401k, like, is there a balance that we can support the creativity, even though it's a little bit of a newer, less conservative route, but also have them grounded? So what do you recommend for those that are the parents of those children coming in?
For the parents, I think the number one thing is listening.
Okay.
Just listen. Just listen with your heart open, and give each person, not just children, but each person the space to speak who they are and be accepted. So first there's listening. Second, there's acceptance. So accepting whatever they say, with an open heart and loving and compassion. So not trying to change what they say, not giving advice, especially not giving advice, prompting them to go deeper. That's the great conversation when you can go back and forth like you're doing here, to prompting to go deeper. What else is there? What's beneath that? What do you really want? What's in your heart? But listening to all the levels of consciousness, because we all talk at all levels of consciousness. So if we're talking about it from our emotions, what we feel, talking about what from our minds, what we think, and then always being open from talking from our soul and our spirit, the highest part of our consciousness. And I think what a parent can do beyond listening and accepting is fostering that there is something even bigger than they might be, than anybody is maybe initially aware of. So go deeper into your awareness. And that's where it gets a little tricky, and where a great listener and a great person that great accepts gets tricky, because when you can foster somebody going way higher in consciousness by prompting them to, by listening deeply, by accepting anything they say, then that starts to open this door to a higher consciousness that can then be present with them, so that what's present with each person are all the levels of consciousness: the body, the mind, the emotion, and then the spirit and the soul. I think there are other cultures that do this, maybe better than our American culture necessarily.
Sure. Yeah.
But in our American culture, if we can, what I see, and it's wonderful, but it is a lot of psychological level of meditation, psychological level of wellness. And my, I always consider people, where else can you go higher? Can you go deeper? What would that be? Don't be scared of it.
Yeah.
Try
Right.
it.
It's like the meditation that's de-stressing us, which is a great start. And then it's like, okay, but now we're de-stressed. We're in the place where we can receive even higher, and we can connect even higher. And I think that's kind of where we are, like you're saying, is that we're using it physiologically. We have the science to support that. We know that meditation is helpful in a mind and body wellness. But yes, going into the next step would be the spirit, the heart opening. And then just to recap, it's interesting because I do want to talk about the advice thing. So you mentioned advice, right? Because I do think as a parent and or any sort of therapist, counselor, mentor, there is this like, well, I'm not doing anything if I don't give advice, right? If I don't say something, if I don't give them feedback. So, what does it look like to what do you say then in like, I hear you, I see you, I'm receiving you? Are there any words that we could specifically use as a parent or a mentor to encourage that? Like, you're safe with me, I'm not going to judge you, things like that you found have been helpful?
Just prizing somebody, acknowledging them, that kind of encouragement. Authentic.
Yeah.
Absolutely authentically. I studied at the University of Santa Monica. They do a degree in spiritual psychology. And what I learned from them is and then when I worked with people, I worked in a jail with women. That's an interesting one not to give advice to, because you'd like to tell them to, hey, stop it.
Right.
Stop what you're doing that's putting you in jail. But you can't, because it has to come from within, or they're just going to go back out and do the same things over. So once you start doing advice, you're you're slathering something on top of somebody when they really have to come to their own wisdom. So a therapist, unless you see somebody running across the street and there's a car coming, then you're going to give advice real fast. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about that level. But that is an important level. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely.
But looking at each person that you're working with as having their own answers, that every single person has access to the wisdom of their own answers. And then looking at maybe where they're stopping themselves from aligning with that and listening to that, or giving them permission or helping them to go, you can hear that answer for yourself. What is it? And then you sit back and listen. And maybe they'll waffle. I can't really hear that. I don't know what you're talking about. But you hold long enough, that still small voice will make itself known to them.
Yeah. And we would often call that intuition, right?
I kind of, you can, but I think intuition can come from a lot of different levels. And what I'm talking about is a deep inner wisdom.
Okay, so
It's
and I love this because we throw a lot of these words around, and I'm always asking for clarity when we say what does authentic means something different to everyone depending on where their level of consciousness might be. So similarly, intuition, right? People will often say, well, how do I know if it's fear or if it's intuition, right? But I love when you said like waiting for that voice, right? Because usually and let me know your thoughts. It's not going to be the really loud one that's just like, especially at first, right? Because we have a lot. So when we're first finding that inner wisdom, would you say that it's like it's a little more subtle?
I find it really subtle, unless I have had one time I was driving. It was a flood. It was like 1,000-year flood where I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I was driving. I had to go bail out a basement, and then I was driving home going up a hill, and you couldn't see. Visibility was like 1.5 feet. And I'm thinking, and I was driving through town and people thought it was a party. There were people, and this was like 11:30 at night. People are out with their umbrellas, and it's just like everybody went to the center of town, all these people. And I'm thinking about that and how fun it was that everybody was out in the rain. And I hear this really loud, "Catherine, wake up." And it was like you and me talking. It was loud. So the loud voice does break through sometimes. It broke through my unconscious reverie at 11:30 at night. And what was going on was I was driving through a river that hadn't been there before. And it was so bad. Actually, I have a truck and a car. I was driving the truck, thank goodness, but the water had gone actually over the top of the truck, which is pretty high. And I don't even know how it kept driving. I have no idea. But I heard hands on the wheel, open the window in case I had to bail out. I went to get my phone. I heard, "Don't get your phone. Phone is irrelevant." Later that next day, somebody had, I drove through at 11:30. At midnight, they had been washed away and died. And they had a car though, so I was lucky. And then also around that time, sometime in the middle of the night or early morning, another car had flipped and he had an airspace. That's how much that river, but that voice was loud. So that voice can break through, and mostly it's subtle though. But for your listeners, I wanted to say, when you need that and you've opened that portal to be present with something bigger than yourself, like I don't have to think of everything through my own mind myself. I am open to my soul and spirit breaking through. It will break through when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we segue into the yoga, your particular journey with yoga, but Nadi yoga?
Nadi yoga, a lot of people in the West don't know about Nadi yoga. Nadi yoga is, my understanding, the very first yoga that there was. as written in the Vedas, and it's the yoga of sound, and specifically more the yoga of the vibrational field of different sounds, so that you can use these sounds, different sounds. I like to use what's called the bija mantras, which are seed mantras in Sanskrit. And they have, or you can use anything. You can use any word if you want to practice a mantra. The beautiful thing about practicing a mantra is that if you're doing meditation or just want to go into stillness, you can come up with a word or use a Sanskrit word. Om. Hu is my favorite. Hu is more Sufi, more of a Sufi word. It comes from Allahu. Sometimes it's pronounced who. Now we're getting in the weeds. Do you want to go into all the weeds of it?
Let's go.
All right, great. So, who or hue is this vibrational frequency that is sort of the web of all creation. So by chanting or listening and it's always ringing. So in every single level of consciousness, there's a sound, a field. You may not hear it auditorily. If you're geared auditorily, you may hear it. But if you're more kinesthetic, maybe you'll feel the rhythm of it. If you're more visual, you may see the colors of it or different pictures when you're practicing Nadi yoga, practicing a sound. In every faith tradition, there's reference to a sound, the celestial melodies, in Judaism, the sound of the heart. In Native American, if you go into a sweat lodge, the healing sweat lodge, there are many different prayers or hymns that call the spirit forward. So every faith tradition, well, in Christianity, we have the modes, we have the Latin chants, Gregorian chanting, different kinds of chanting. And these bring an energetic, and you can ride that back into the highest realms of consciousness. That is an ancient spiritual practice. One of the most ancient that I've ever studied or been aware of, which it comes from sound. Now you can put it
right back to the, the Om, right? We know that's the primordial sound. Most people are, can agree that's the primordial sound. But can you also tie make a connection between sound and getting out of the lower consciousness or the egoic mind in like almost like the mantra is able to help you bypass that? Is that one of the ways that it works, or is a way that people can understand it differently if they're maybe not able to get into the different frequencies or vibrations?
That's exactly the way it works.
Okay.
And that's how I practice. It's one of my main spiritual practices, is practicing the sound, a sound. I use the hue because that resonates with me, but there are many, and you don't have to use an ancient Sanskrit one,
right?
Or Om. Some people love Om. And the practice to keep your mind in point is to chant inwardly and then listen. And expand your consciousness, your spiritual ears, your spiritual sight, that inner place, to feel it, hear it, see it, and then let it take you, like you jump in a river and the river takes you. Like you go into a current and let it take you. When the mind comes back, and it will, just go back to the sound and then let it take you. So each level of consciousness. So we have, every tradition has way different names for this, but metaphysically, physical, astral, mental, imagination, emotional, causal, and then into the soul realms. So there's a void or a sort of ceiling with a opening. The ceiling sometimes is a mirror, and you get to look back at all parts of your consciousness. But when you can break through that by listening to a sound that comes from a higher realm, that comes from the soul, that is like jumping into a river and letting the current take you. And then you just listen. Now, as a practical, you brought up practical as a practical matter. When we go into those higher realms of consciousness, they're not physical. We don't have reference points until we do have reference points. So once you practice, and it might take years. For me, I'm a slow learner. It took me years. I started to be able to really taste and feel the sound current after about 10 years of practice. But I know somebody that I was talking to about this, and she was like, in 5 minutes. She had the sound current in 5 minutes. And I was like, what's wrong with me? She had it in 5. Everybody's so different.
Right.
But where was I? I lost my train of thought. So on a practical matter. So one thing I did to practice this, because there aren't any reference points, we're in physical bodies, physical minds, physical emotions. You get up into the soul realm, this is not physical anymore. So it looks different, feels different. So I started writing down as soon as I came back from meditation or spiritual exercises, as I call them, and other people have called them. I would write down the sights and sounds, my impressions. Just write them down. Even if you go, I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything, nothing there. You just write it down. Over time, my experience was that, those were the same sights and sounds. And I started to learn the topography of the inner levels, their sounds, their colors, their energy fields. And then, it's that simple. It's really pretty simple, actually.
So somebody starting out with a practice, let's say they're going to start a morning practice, and they pick up a mantra, or they listen to some ohms, or they choose something, right? So how long should they start to listen to, like, say they have half an hour, how long should they listen to it or chant? Should they journal, or should before or after, or try different modalities? Can you speak to a couple options that people, again, maybe they have 30 minutes in the morning to start a practice? We're always preaching, try to stick with it for 30 days and do a similar time each day, that kind of a thing. But in terms of, like, more specifically with the ohms and the writing it down, or not the ohms, but the sound.
The sound. So first of all, I would say over time, each person will find their own practice, and it may change. So I do this like a spiritual scientist, which is actually what my degrees are in. So see what works, change it, course correct, try something different. And over time, different things will speak to you differently. So you might be thirsty to hear the Om. You just can't get enough of it. And then 9 months later, it doesn't do much for you. Try something else. And you don't have to use Sanskrit. You can use, right now, I was really inspired by the fable of a master called Li Po. Li Po was, I don't know what years he was, but ancient. And they said about him that he was so loving, you could see the radiance of his heart through his clothes. So I was inspired by this. And as a spiritual scientist, I went, let me see if I can practice that. So I'm using the word loving as a action, as a verb, loving. So I'm just using that as a mantra. I don't know where it'll go. I don't know where it'll take me, but I'm just playing with it. That's a beautiful word. Let's try that as a mantra. So what I'll do is I'll write down my intention. What's my intention for my 5 minutes, my half hour? My intention is to be like Li Po, be so loving. My heart is radiant with love. It's just bright. That's my intention. Okay. Then I'll chant that word love or loving. Be quiet and listen. Chant that word love. be quiet and listen until everything's so quiet and still inside. And then I find the rhythm of it. I find the field of energy, of love in this case, and then I ride it. Like, where can it take me? That's my question. Where can it take me? And have the courage to go on that adventure. And then when I come back, I'll write what were the sights and sounds? What were my impressions? How do I feel now? And that's my practicality. My part of my practice is to write it down. And that sort of anchors it and brings, I can kind of articulate within myself the experience. Because again, in these really refined, beautiful levels, we don't always have reference points. So I want to go for the awareness. Awareness to me is a really important part of the spiritual journey. It's not for everyone. Some people can chant a tone, never bring in awareness. It doesn't matter. But it really doesn't matter. You can still travel the highest realms of the spiritual life and not be aware, not bring any of it back, but you're still part of it. So, but I like the awareness. So that's why I do the writing exercise. I would say, don't do this as a torture. If your mind starts going, you didn't do your half hour, fine, stop. I don't impose necessarily a timeline for myself. So one thing I do though in the morning, my morning practice is I don't go into the world until I hit that resonance of the divine presence. So I don't want to be in this world without that. Even though I lose it during the day, even though something comes and I'm disturbed by somebody in traffic or something on the news or whatever is pulling me out of that divine presence, I'm still not going to enter my day. That's just me without that. So that's how I practice, is I wait to hear, see, feel, know that I have transcended the physical limitations into something beyond myself, even if I can't explain it. And then I'm done. I'm still working on holding that. So once a person practices and can play in that field, be in that field, and we all have. Some people say, oh, I've never experienced that. I would say you probably have. Pretty sure you have. You just don't remember it, or you don't define it for yourself that way. But a beautiful fall day with the sun shining through the leaves, and you're transported. The sound of a river or a brook, the snow coming down, all glistening in diamonds, and you go, I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about it. And you go, that just took me way beyond, that just took me into inspiration. They've
Yeah,
experienced.
that is inspirational.
Beautiful.
One of the things that you've done a great job doing is these are like kind of transcendent, esoteric, and to a certain extent, really just wild kind of topics, right? And you do a great job of and really articulating them in a way that's accessible to people. And you're accepting. You had said a couple times that you don't have to use the Sanskrit necessarily. You use a word. You mentioned love. For someone like me, love would just be a non-starter because it has so many layers to it, and I'm so familiar with the word. It would distract me, I think, from the goal of having it as the word, and I would just prefer a sound or a word that I didn't have a long history with. But it's great that you are offering, alternatives and ways for people to get involved. One of the things that I really love is how there's so much out there. Like you said, it's become a lot more mainstream, this holistic world and spirituality and things like that. But what I really love talking to you about and want to hear about is how you say you can go deeper and higher, right? A lot of times, from anecdotally, just from what I'm seeing and observing, is there's a lot of just like, let's get back to stasis and then we're good. right? Do a little meditation, do some mindfulness, get back to the baseline, and then I'll go back into the track. Then I'll go back into the world that many others are in. And it's exciting to hear someone talk about taking it to another level. You said it took 10 years as part of one journey. Can you give a little behind the curtain, like what's at that rainbow? What can we expect to find? It's probably different for everyone, but what are we reaching for, striving for? What can we expect to find when we arrive?
Well, the great paradox is that I'm sure you've heard, or some of you have heard. The paradox is a person wanting enlightenment, and when they get enlightenment, they know they were always enlightened. The okay, I'm just trying to think about how. I'm glad you want to go there. That's great. So it is great. In my experience, when I am traveling the inner levels, I like to go to the edge of creation. When you listen to the sound, everything's created out of sound. Everything is created out of sound, out of vibration, right? Scientists tell us this. If you follow the sound current, not a yoga, if you follow the sound current, it will take you to the edge of creation. It will take you there, where there is no more form, it's formless. Where there's no more being, it's all beings. Where there's no more breath, it's presence, it's complete presence. Where there's no more individuality, except you are individual within a context of great oneness. Where all you know you are everything and are a part of everything. Where you are liberated, you are existing in freedom, and you are illuminated in the presence of everything that there is.
I'm just kind of soaking
Yes,
in that
we're
vibe.
incubating. We're incubating that. We're soaking that in. Wow, that's beautiful. So, all right, well, you have 20 minutes to tell us how to get there. so,
We start now.
start now.
We can get it by the end of the hour.
Yeah.
Start right now.
I think many people go there in their dreams.
Yeah.
I think we leave our body, mind, and emotions and this behind, and we go there. We go as high as we go. But it's all, I think there is a spiritual promise that if you set that intention, that's where you want to go, you want that kind of awareness. Sometimes it's called the mystic journey. It's a mystical journey. It's not as rare as you might think. If you look throughout history, we have saints, we have spiritual masters that lived from that place and lived normal lives also, so that we can live a multidimensional life. You can be aware of the high spiritual planes, at the same time cook your dinner and sit down with your family at the same time. You can
That's like
and
that's the
that
end of talk about the end of the rainbow. That's like where it's at right there. If you can do that. Tara, you have something? I have a question.
well, that it makes me think when you were saying that, I kept thinking of um chop wood, carry water. Is that
Yes.
the expression?
Yeah.
Right? Because when we think we haven't experienced it, or maybe we haven't experienced it for prolonged periods of time, that it's something outside of ourselves, right? And that we have to get there. And I think that's often a normal part of the journey, right? It's that hero's journey, like venturing off, coming back. And so, now we're back. And so you said a few things that I want to go back to and touch on in that, when you were speaking of like maybe not going out until you felt that presence of spirit or divinity. A lot of times now, people are using the word alignment, which I really like, because sometimes I can compare that. For me personally, I say that I feel like tapped in, and so it's like
Mhm.
if I get pulled out, like you said, like the traffic's a great example, right? It's like, wait, I was just kind of pulled out, like I gotta and I do like the word alignment, like realign, right? Get back in. And that's the practice. I mean, like, I love how you compare a lot of these religions and spiritual practices and these evolutionary, like, of the consciousness practices, because they're archetypes, right? It is the, okay, coming back to the present moment, coming back to the breath, coming back to the sound. So I think you so beautifully articulated that, that commonality that we all maybe face. And so my question is going to be, how you personally work with people, and how you have found over all of these generations, even though everybody's unique, the best way to mentor, and what feels right for you, and how you bring that into, people having, like, their enlightenment experience, having their cake and eating it too, so to speak, right? Like being able to travel between worlds and dimensions and realms, like Brian said, like you make it sound like almost easy, and everyone has access to it, which is true, though I still have to remind myself that too. So I know that's a little, so take it wherever you like to, but I guess maybe speaking a little to where your work has brought you today, and how you're, how you're helping people currently, or at least your intention is to help, um, the collective.
Well, here's again the paradox. We live in a dualistic existence, the physical and the spiritual. Until we practice to where we get to be multidimensional aware, we still have to work as humans on on mastering ourselves. That's what I call mastering ourselves, bringing back into alignment. Or if you want to talk about sound, I love the word attunement. Attunement with the greater field of energy, that field, that river of light that can carry us. We often, in beginning years, live in we're either in that meditating and finding that divine presence and riding that sound current, that river, into a greater awareness and higher consciousness, until we get where we live in multidimensional awareness. Then the alignment never doesn't exist. The alignment is always there. We just have to remember ourselves to it. Or the attunement is always there. We just remember ourselves to it. And after a while, you can master yourself well enough. And it is easy. There's nothing hard about this. And it is accessible to everyone. We are all designed for this. This is what we're designed for, is living a physical life and be attuned to what transcends physical life. So I just lost my train of thought again. I went off. I love these questions, by the way. They're the deepest questions I've encountered yet in the podcast world. So I really appreciate it.
I have a follow up on that too, because Tara was talking about how you kind of are guiding the people that you're working with now to be able to do a little bit of both. That's something that I was also going to piggyback off, if I may. I wonder how you get people to. It's almost, I do feel though that if, God willing, universe willing, realm willing, you get to that point, it almost seems like, and I don't want to plant this seed in anyone's mind, but the daily grind is so monotonous and so mundane. Like that's the fear or the worry that I would have. When you reach a place, right, of kind of higher understanding, learning, and you start to experience that there's so much more, the kind of minutia of our uh, physical kind of daily life can be a grind. Well, how how do you encourage people that to make the most of it, or even yourself, when it's almost like you the secret, and but you still have to interact and do those things that you've always done throughout your life, and interact with other people that are still in that place? How do you enjoy all parts of your life when you reach a certain point?
Well, the exact opposite happens, where chopping wood, carrying water becomes magic, where the day-to-day, what you're talking about, the grind, becomes a prayer, where where you don't want anything else. That you don't want anything else. That's the great thing. You're just so fulfilled and satisfied in the tiny little simple things, because they all are shining now. You see the divinity in every little thing. It becomes magic. It's like, here's magic at your doorstep. Here's these surprises. Um, and there's self-mastery in noticing them, making a point of, wow, this is such a beautiful thing that just happened. And, I'm just going to pay attention to that as a moment of my soul celebrating. But everything becomes, there's not a grind, because time kind of stops. It's hard to explain it, but pretty soon it's not like 8 hours in a day. It's just an opening in the moment of existence, and nothing is moving you forward or pushing you back. You're just in timelessness and spacelessness, actually, too. And so delighted in just everything. I Does it mean that life doesn't present you with hardships? Certainly. I mean, that's sort of part of this life, is to give you a bunch of hurdles to see, I think, to see how strong you are. And can you see, the Dalai Lama, he came to where I live in Boulder, Colorado, and went to see him long time ago. And he told this story of one of his monks that was imprisoned when the Chinese came. And the monk was let out after 20 years. It was a very long time, something like that. If I get the Dalai Lama, if you're listening, if I get the story wrong, forgive me. But he said to the monk, and it was a horrible conditions, disease, rats. And the Dalai Lama said to him, weren't you in terrible danger? And the monk said, yes. And Dalai Lama said, of the conditions, and he said, no, of getting angry. That's,
Wow.
yeah. So we can aspire to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, to comment on what Brian is saying, I think of the expression, like, instead of like I have to, we start to shift to like I get to, right? It's like that
Mhm.
that attitude of gratitude. It's like a step. And it also makes me think of like a near death experience, right? Some people, they'll come back and they'll be like, "Oh, I just want to go there." And then to me, I think of it as like, well, that's the integration process, right? It's like bringing heaven to earth. It's like that
Mhm.
can be here now, like all the time. But again, it's like the practice of it, right? We're human. That's part of the purpose. And so to me, it's like if you can enjoy the journey and not like reach too far, but like know that it's kind of on its way. At least that's what I'm gathering. That's my interpretation of what you've said and what you're saying.
Well, I would just add, why not reach really far?
Yeah, I love that.
Reach as far as you can ever imagine, and then go beyond that, because
Yeah,
it's way beyond what we can imagine.
yeah,
Reach for that. Maybe you'll get there, maybe you won't, and maybe the journey will be even harder if you reach for that, but reach for it.
yeah, absolutely.
You have a lot to share if you do. This is where we become really able to contribute. Really able to contribute. Not because we do anything, but because we are what we're reaching for, and we begin to start to know it. And then we hold the presence. And just in that energy field of the presence that we hold is a great contribution. And the opportunities to serve by something to do will come each person's way, and you'll know it. You'll know what you're called to do if you are called to do. For some reason, I'm called to talk to people now for the first time in my life. And I'm finding I can talk to people. I never knew that. I was not a big talker ever in my life. Now it's like, talk, you've got something to share, talk about it. And things change that way in terms of what we share and how we serve and how we contribute. So yeah, go as far as you can. Visualize it. See what you think it is to be a saint, to be an enlightened being, and go, I want that. That's where I'm going. And I don't know how I'll get there, but I know that spirit, because I've asked for it, will lead me there.
Mm. Yeah. And
That's
so
amazing.
asking and being open is a great place to start. All the practices are fabulous, but if we just start with like, I'm open, I'm reaching for the stars, so to speak, and I'm open to it. So you said you're speaking to people, and I'm just being funny, but in this realm or others or both, were you implying?
Well, I've just started to do a podcast tour right now because I put together these spiritual practices. People would come to me, will you meditate with me? And I thought, I don't think that's really what they're asking. I think they're asking for a connection with their soul and spirit. They're asking for an alignment, an attunement with something bigger than them. And then they would come to me and say, I can't meditate. And I thought, because I can't keep my mind is running me around, or I can't sit still, and not that I was a meditation teacher. I was never that, but I don't know even how they knew I was a meditator. I don't know if it shows or something, but people would
It's
start
in the
asking,
aura.
well, I guess, I don't know. I can be really quiet. I guess that maybe, but so I thought that's not what they're asking. They're really asking how to be aligned with something bigger than themselves. So I put together practices that I'd learned from studying ancient traditions, from practicing what I practice, from doing meditations. And people always say, I don't have enough time. I don't have time to sit down. So I thought, well, how can I go really deep in a short amount of time? Well, I do it. And so let me see how I can help others. So I recorded 5 spiritual practices and then put them together in a program. So I do that for people. And then it's a subscription thing. If people subscribe to it, they'll get me once a week to talk to them like I'm talking to you, or answer questions, or just share, just listen. So that's coming up. I'm just launching it. I don't work one-on-one with people. That's not what I do. I'd rather work with a group and just listen and be there for them. I've worked with some of the hardest of the hardest. That's what I like, people in jail. And I worked with women particularly, and I worked with the police department. So I went out on calls. So assaults and drug overdoses, and I'm real good in the hardest of the hardest. But now, so that's, if I do something one-on-one, I would do that. But now I just have a group that might want to try some of these things we've been talking about, or deepen what they already have. And denomination or what their faith tradition, what your faith makes no difference. It's for everybody.
Amazing.
Wow. Well, you mentioned, before I forget, you mentioned we've gone, well, t time is meaningless, or maybe it doesn't exist, right? So because we started in at TikTok and your cutting edge marketing and social media presence and things, and now I want to go all the way back to the beginning real quick, because you had mentioned listening and acceptance a couple of times, and learning from the ancients. Who was that person that first listened to you or validated what you had wanted to do? Maybe if you didn't even know you were headed off of the track that was already laid out for you and into this new calling that you have? Was there a specific mentor or kind of guru or influence back then? And can you give us one maybe trait or characteristic that made them good at doing that?
Well, I had this very beautiful and unusual experience where I lived on a ranch up in the mountains, and I lived above the barn in like a 2-room, no running water thing. There was a big ranch house, and some Sufis moved there. And the Sufi that was the teacher was named Rashad Field. He's passed away. Some people may know him. He was a renowned Sufi teacher. And I was studying hard sciences in college at the time. And so he would just talk to me because I didn't put him on a pedestal, right? I mean, I didn't know what a spiritual teacher was. No idea. So I would just chat with them, and he would just chat, and he got the biggest kick out of me. Because I wasn't a student, but I learned from them the spiritual heart. The Sufis and I learned about the sound current there. Then they moved out, and some people that follow Native American traditions moved in. And John Fire Lame Deer he wrote Lame Deer Speaks. It's a famous book on ceremony and in Lakota tradition. And they moved in, and they would invite me to the ceremonies. His son was leading the ceremonies. They were all in Lakota, so I don't know what they were saying, and I wasn't even interested, but they had a feast afterwards, so I went for the food. And I just loved their big feast, but I got to go to all these very sacred ceremonies. And I was like, school is not very interesting. I want to know about this. And then I found a teacher that I really, after having those other teachers, and I studied with a Hindu teacher, mantra. I live here in Boulder, Colorado, where we have a huge Tibetan Buddhist community. I studied with them, and Rinpoche, he's passed away now also. And then I found home. I found a teacher named John Roger. He's also a sound current teacher. So it all fit together. And his characteristic was he was hysterical. He was just so funny. But he's got so many teachings out there. He traveled for 50 years just talking and doing seminars. So I still study with him and his recording teachings. But he led to a sound current practice, a mantra practice. He taught soul transcendence to transcend this physical and go back into the heart of God. And that was for me. So
That's a beautiful journey.
Absolutely. You're
Yeah.
so well rounded, and
Yeah. Yes.
it's
Thank you
impressive.
so much for the work that you do. I love to ask people a book, and I don't ask them ahead of time because I'm always curious what they'll say, like on the spot. A book that you could recommend to our listeners, something that was inspirational for you or taught you something or meaningful along your path, that everyone might benefit from reading once in their lifetime.
Well, the great definitive, I have 3. The great definitive book is Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yes.
I mean, there's just nothing better than that almost, I don't think. And that is a biography of Yogi Yogananda. And the other book on the sound current, oh my gosh, I can never pronounce his name. Hezra Inayat Khan, I believe. He's also passed, but it's the definitive book on the sound current. And then if you want a very, that's the author, the name of the book, The Mystic Sound, I think. Sounds of the Mystic. It's a more esoteric book. It was written a long time ago, so it's a little hard to read. It's kind of, the language is kind of archaic. But if you can get through it, it has mystic keys beyond just about anything. Mystic keys. And then John Roger has a book, Journey of the Soul. That's a really simple, small little book. You can actually go to their website, msi.org, and you can get it for free. I think you can download it or they'll send it to you, the organization. that kind of supports his teachings, Journey of a Soul. And that is just gives the whole, it really gives the journey of the soul beyond this physical existence, but also the practicality of this physical existence. And it's a short little book. It's a beautiful book to read too.
I love that. Thank you so much for the work that you do and
Absolutely.
everything.
So before we sign off, please let our listeners and viewers how they can find you online and a little preview of what they can expect when they get there.
Well, if you go to soulandspirit.net and kind of cruise through, that's my website. And there's a complimentary daily quote from I curated from some of my favorite spiritual masters throughout history, just some of their teachings. So if you'd like to get a quote every day, you could go there and just put your details in there, your email, and get that. And if you like the idea of doing 5 to 7 minutes of spiritual practices, I have a subscription program where you're delivered those 5. You get an invocation, a teaching from one of the spiritual masters, not duplicated in what I just told you about another one, and an affirmation to kind of work your mind and emotional levels in that direction, and a chant. So I have been a chant artist, and I composed the music, had it arranged, and I have one of the ancient chants. So that could just transport you into the sound current, and then a guided meditation with some stillness, some quiet, so the person can go and listen themselves. And it's just 5 to 7 minutes a day. I made it simple, but the depth that we could go together in those.
Yeah, I love when you said earlier, like, if you can do it that quick, like anyone can do it. Like I love that attitude of, we don't have to necessarily, nothing against it, but sit in meditation for 2 or 3 hours just to connect, right? That, that we can have these beautiful experiences and integrations that are accessible for our modern world. So it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be in your presence and to hear your wisdom, and I'm so grateful for all the work that you're doing and have done.
I'm just a student. I'm just a student. That's
Yes.
it. I'm just
And
learning
a
here with
humble
everybody
woman.
else.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. And everyone, get on that 5 to 7 minutes. Simple yet profound. Be consistent. Daily practices. Got some history in there. Got some very accessible stuff in there. It's really gonna definitely change your experience from mind, body, spirit. That's really a way to get started. And a lot of us are maybe a little hesitant to step over into that world, but Dr. Corona's really set it up nicely for you. So thank you again for joining us. Stay in touch. We'd love to do it again.
That'd be great. You guys are the best. Thank you. I loved it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Journey to Your Best Self podcast. We appreciate you being part of this community. For more resources, insights, and ways to connect, head over to youroneself.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and Overcast. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep aligning your mind, body, and spirit, and peace, love, and self-discovery.